Hi, welcome to Right to Top. I'm Adam. In today's video, we're going to continue with our look at the subject-verb agreement. So part of our grammar lesson. Part 1, you can see the link to that video in the description box below. And you can see what we talked about in Part 1 about making sure that verbs and subjects agree in numbers and person, etc. Today, we're going to look specifically at the subject. Most of the times that people make mistakes with subject verb agreement is because they're not exactly sure what the subject is. Now, for those of you taking the IELTS, TOEFL, or any English test, this is very important to understand both for the reading section and for the essay, for the writing. You always have to make sure that your subject and your verb agree, but first of all, you have to understand what is a subject, what can be a subject. Now, there are many different types. We're not going to look at all of them in detail, but I'm going to give you a very general understanding of the different subjects. So first of all, look here and you'll notice that we have 10 different types of subjects, 10 different ways that a subject can present itself. Numbers 8, 9, and 10, those are the ones with the asterisks. That little symbol is called an asterisk. Those are going to be separate videos because they're a little bit more complicated. Today we're going to look at just the different types of subjects, what they look like. I'm going to give you examples of each type of subject, so that way you can identify them and then make sure that you make your verb agree with that subject. We have simple nouns, pronouns, and proper nouns. These are the most common types of subjects. Noun phrases, noun clauses, gerunds, infinitives, preparatory subjects, conjunctions, compound subjects, which we'll make a different video for, collective subjects, which I'll make a different video for, and very specific types of pronouns, none, either, all, this. Sometimes these can be a little bit confusing. So simple nouns, table is a simple noun. I, simple, it's a pronoun. I, she, he, they, we. John, any proper noun, or Google, any name is a pronoun, a regular, simple subject. Noun phrase, the man with the hat, the man standing by the window. The noun clause, what he says has implications. Gerund, feeling tired. Now, gerunds can be a little bit confusing. We'll look at that a little bit more. You can use an infinitive, to verb, as a subject. Just because it's a verb doesn't mean it can't be a subject. Preparatory, it, there, sometimes called a dummy subject. Conjunctions, like when we begin an adjective clause or a noun clause, the conjunction that introduces that clause can be the subject of that clause. Compounds with using and, or, neither, etc. Collective, staff can be singular, can be plural, and the other pronouns. Let's get into it, okay? So, first of all, let's talk about subjects in general, some basic principles. Every clause must have a subject. If there's no subject, it's not a clause. Now, just to refresh our memories, what is a clause? A clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb and a complete idea, okay? A sentence can be one clause. A sentence can have many clauses, okay? But every sentence in English must have at least one independent clause. An independent clause can stand by itself as a complete idea, okay? We're going to look at clauses in a separate video as well. A sentence with multiple clauses, of course, will have multiple subjects. So if you see a very complex sentence or a compound complex sentence, make sure that you identify all the different clauses and make sure that each clause has a subject. Now, you're not always going to see the subject. Sometimes it can be reduced, but it's going to be there somewhere. Subjects can be omitted if it is obvious that their matching verb agrees with them. For example, in a compound, you can have two subjects with one verb because it's the same verb for both subjects. You can take the second one out. Or, sorry, one verb, two verbs for the same subject is what I meant to say. In inversion, you can sometimes take out the subjects. Again, we're going to look at that in more detail. Let's start with simple nouns, pronouns, and proper nouns. Black holes. Now, the simple noun can be singular or plural. The plural will generally have an S or some form of a plural, sometimes an irregular plural. But the simple nouns, if you have a singular subject, you can have a matching singular verb. Plural, plural, etc. Black holes are still a mystery to scientists. Black holes, there are many of them, are Some believe, so some is a pronoun. A black that, we have an adjective clause, a noun clause. A black hole holds. One black hole, or a general black hole, holds, singular. They further believe, they, the scientists, this is a pronoun, a third person plural pronoun. They further believe, not believes, that one day we, another pronoun. Dr. Emmanuel Craig, a name. A name is a proper noun, okay? It's always going to be capitalized, and it's always going to be probably a singular if it's a name of a person or a name of a company. If you have compounds with different names, you're going to have a plural. Space Exp, or I don't know, SPAC Exp, however you pronounce it. Again, proper noun, company name, works towards. So this company, singular, works. The staff there, the staff claim their work has already. So claim with staff. We have staff as individual people, therefore claim because it's a plural. Staff can also be singular, claims, but we'll look at that separately. Their work, we have a pronoun adjective with work as the noun. Has already. Has singular, work is singular. Again, you have to keep in mind countable, uncountable, but that's a whole other issue. This is supported by, so this is the demonstrative pronoun, singular. So this whole situation before is supported by this claim in this case. That they have published, they is the pronoun, and patents that they own, okay? So simple nouns are, again, everybody knows this. Everybody can identify them as the subject of the clause, and they will have their matching verb. So usually people don't have a problem with this. Once we get into the more detailed types of subjects, that's where the problems occur. Let's look at noun phrases. So first of all, a noun phrase has a head noun, which is the main noun, and then all kinds of modifying pieces, okay? The head noun is what agrees with the verb, or the verb agrees with the head noun, more precise. If the head noun is singular, the verb is singular. If the head noun is plural, the verb is plural, okay? The rest of the phrase includes and is made up of modifiers. The diplomat's real intention in visiting the kingdom is not known. Now, here you have a few things. Diplomat, intention, and kingdom. You have three nouns. But the whole phrase, okay, so this is the noun phrase, the diplomat's real intention in visiting the kingdom. This is your noun phrase. The whole thing works together to make the subject. But the verb can only agree with one of these nouns. It can't agree with all of them. It agrees with intention, which is singular. That's why the verb is. The diplomats. Diplomats, you have the apostrophe S. You're making it a possessive. Therefore, it's an adjective. Real is an adjective. The is an article. In visiting the kingdom. This is a prepositional phrase. In visiting. Visiting is sort of like a gerund. Visiting what or where? The kingdom. So visiting the kingdom is an object to visiting. So it's not the actual noun of the phrase. So once you identify the head noun, match your verb to it. Intention singular is singular verb. The use of diamonds in precision surgery. So again, even though the last word, surgery, is a noun, it is not the subject. The use is the subject of diamonds. So use of what, where, in precision surgery. So the whole thing, the use of diamonds in precision surgery, difficult word. This is your noun phrase. Use is your head noun. Use is singular. Is your matching verb, okay? And the whole thing, of course, is a simple clause. Groups that advocate for journalistic freedom. That advocate for journalistic freedom. This is an adjective clause modifying groups. Groups is your head noun. It is plural. It takes the verb are, which agrees with it, are mostly NGOs. The editor decided that stories about the scandal that are not supported by confirmed sources are not to be published. Okay, so the editor decided what? That stories. Now here again, you have a bunch of subjects. The editor decided. This is your independent clause. What did he decide? Decided that stories about the scandal that are not supported by confirmed sources. That is your object to decided. Okay? And so decided that these stories are not to be published. That is his decision. That is the object to decided. And that's why stories agrees with are not. Stories is plural, are is a plural verb. Now, the editor is a noun, that, beginning your noun clause. Stories is your subject of your noun clause. Stories about the scandal that are not supported by confirmed sources. Adjective clause about stories. So stories is basically still the head noun of this noun clause, which we're going to look at in a second. And then the verb agrees with stories. Okay? A little confusing, I'm sure. Let's look at noun clauses now. A noun clause, remember, can be a subject, could be an object, could be a complement, but it is always singular. The noun clause itself as the subject is singular. In the last example we looked at, the noun clause is acting as the object. That stories are not to be published is your full noun clause with the extra modifiers in between. So a noun clause is always singular when the whole noun clause is the subject. And don't forget that the noun clause has its own subject in the noun clause. And the conjunction, the word that introduces the noun clause, can be the subject itself, okay? What he says about the movie, so the full clause, what he says about the movie, he says, you have a subject and a verb, you have a clause, beginning with what to introduce the noun clause. What he says about the movie, this is a whole noun clause subject. And because a noun clause subject is always singular, is strictly his opinion. Inside the noun clause, he says. He is the subject, says is the verb. Now, in the second example, the conjunction is the subject. What happens on the road to recovery is a personal experience and cannot be shared accurately. So if you look at the whole sentence, what is the subject of this sentence? What happens on the road to recovery? This noun clause is the subject, singular, is a personal. Inside the noun clause, what is the subject, happens is the verb of the noun clause. So again, it's a good idea to get a review of how noun clauses work, but again, that will be a separate video about the dependent clauses. But for now, just make sure you can recognize it as a subject. Okay, let's move on. So now we're going to look at gerunds. Now, the thing about gerunds is that they're using an ing form of a word, and it gets very confusing because ing forms can have other functions. Ing words can be nouns, they could be adverbs, they could be adjectives. So it's very important to recognize a gerund for what it is. A gerund can be the head noun in a noun phrase. A gerund is an activity, okay? Something is actually happening, but there's no real verb. There's no action. It's just the name of the activity. Although, because it's technically still a verb, it can take an object. So that object becomes part of the gerund phrase, okay? And the gerund itself is the head noun of that phrase, which we're going to see in a second in examples. Some simple nouns can be in the ing forms. And this is where people get confused because some words, their simple noun form is an ing, but it's not a gerund. And I'll show you an example. Some gerunds have no simple noun form. So some activities, there is no noun for it. So you have to remember, it's always the gerund that is the noun for this word. And therefore you have a gerund and you're going to have a gerund phrase or just a gerund by itself. And gerunds are always singular. So every time you have a gerund or a gerund phrase as your subject, it's going to be matched with a singular verb, okay? Let's look at the examples. Feeling guilty is a normal reaction in this situation. So feeling what? Guilty. So guilty is the object to feeling. Feeling is therefore the gerund, okay? And feeling guilty, the whole thing is the subject, but feeling is the actual head noun, if you want to call it that. It's a gerund, but it's acting like a noun, so it's the head noun. And feeling is the subject, and then is a normal reaction. Feeling this way. Now, feelings of guilt are often associated with this decision. So you have different feelings, right? Anger, sadness, happiness. All of these are feelings, and feelings is the simple noun form of this word, of feelings, okay? There's no activity, there's no action. It's just the thing itself. Happiness, anger, sadness. These are all feelings, and therefore feelings can take the S. So it's not a gerund, so be careful not to confuse gerunds with simple nouns, simple noun forms of words. Now, because it's a simple noun and because it can take a plural, it is matched with a plural verb. Feelings are often. Are. Now, smoking is detrimental to one's health. Smoking doesn't have a simple noun. It's always this activity of putting a cigarette in your mouth, okay? Smoking is. Now, if you want to have a gerund phrase, smoking tobacco products. Remember, the verb is not going to agree with products. It's going to agree with the head noun, in this case, the gerund, smoking. Smoking is detrimental. Smoking tobacco products is detrimental to one's health. So make sure you always recognize a gerund. You recognize a simple noun in an ing form. Make sure you're doing the right thing. If you have a gerund by itself, if you have a gerund phrase, still identify the actual subject. Make sure your verb agrees with it. Okay, I'll give you some more examples after. Infinitive. To verb can be a subject, okay? It is very formal. When you're beginning a sentence with an infinitive as your subject, it's considered very formal. It's not very common, but again, if you're taking a language test and you're going to see some academic writing, you probably will see this now and again, okay? But infinitives, because they're very formal, they're a little bit uncomfortable, so people often replace them with a dummy subject, which we're going to look at in a second as well. A dummy subject is usually it or there, depending on the situation. You can also change an infinitive subject into a gerund. So look at the examples. To point out others' flaws is easy. To notice one's own is a different matter. So to point out, to let somebody know his or her flaws, that's easy. But to notice my own, to do this action, to point out, to notice. If I say pointing out others' flaws, so this is the activity. So to point out, to do it, the action. Pointing out the activity or the situation of this action, as it were. Then, if you want to change it to a dummy, basically what you're doing is you're putting it as the subject and you're putting the actual subject later on after the verb. It is easy to point out others' flaws. It is a different matter to notice one's own. So the meaning doesn't change. The first two sentences mean the same thing, but instead of starting with the infinitive, which is very formal, you're starting with it and putting the infinitive a little bit later, but it does the same thing. And then pointing out others' flaws is easy. Noticing one's own is a different matter. All three sentences mean the same thing. Okay. But again, the key is to notice that you're always going to agree with the verb, right? And sorry, I forgot to mention it here, but an infinitive subject also is always singular. So to point out is easy. To notice is, etc. Any infinitive, okay? To see him perform live is really inspiring. So let's talk about this preparatory subject. Usually it's it or there. When we have a noun clause as a subject, or we have an infinitive, we usually replace it with it. So replace a noun clause, an infinitive, or an expression of existence. That he is a genius is widely believed. Now, technically, this sentence is correct, but it feels a little bit awkward. It's very formal to begin a sentence with a that noun clause, so we just move it to the end. It is widely believed that he is a genius. Okay? And the meaning doesn't change. Now, is widely believed, it looks like an object, but it's not because it's a passive, so it's the same regardless of which side you put it on. 4 chairs are in the room. So again, people don't like to begin with 4 chairs are in the room because they don't like to have the thing itself and then the are. There are 4 chairs in the room. The meaning doesn't change. I'm going to make a separate lesson about there is, there are, and what follows it. But until I get to there, just remember in writing, as much as possible, avoid beginning a sentence with there is, there are. It's considered a little bit of a weak sentence, so try to avoid it if you can. Conjunctions. So you have an adjective clause, you have a noun clause. Don't forget that the clause conjunction can be the subject. The media outlet that produces these shows has reported a spike. So that is both the conjunction of the adjective clause and the subject of the adjective clause. So the outlet, that produces, outlet produces. That means the outlet. It's modifying that noun. Keep in mind as well, the media outlet producing these shows. So that produces, when you have a subject and conjunction working as the same word and the verb, you can squeeze them together and make a participle, an ing. The only thing to remember is that producing these shows is now not a clause anymore. Now it is a participle. Again, a separate video for that will be coming on using participles. The player who aims to be a champion this year. So the player, now even if you have identifying or non-identifying clauses, it doesn't matter. The conjunction can still be the subject if it works. Who, which, that can all be subjects. Okay. Now compounds, again, I said I'll make another video because sometimes it gets a little complicated. Neither the team members nor their leader. When you have neither nor, the verb agrees with what follows the nor, not the first part of the compound subject, the second. So neither the team members nor their leader. Neither the leader nor the team members are responsible if I switch it around. So what comes after nor, that's what the verb agrees with. Larry and I, so two together makes it plural, are seeing friends. Now, if you have two gerunds, remember gerunds are singular, but if you have two of them in a compound, then you're making a plural. Being healthy and feeling happy are closely linked aspects. Now, collective nouns, police, staff, all kinds of words that can be including all members or in the individuals. The staff are invited to join. We're talking about the individual staff members. The staff is to be retrained following the gap. So the entire staff as one group is to be retrained. But again, there'll be another video. And now the difficult pronouns, none, either, all. Sometimes these are singular, sometimes they're plural, sometimes they're only one, but convention has made them acceptable in both forms. None of the students wants to admit to the prank. So none of the students, even though you have students, we're looking at none as a singular. No one student wants to admit. None want the punishment. We're talking again collectively. So again, it depends on the context. There's a lot of things to look at when you're talking about these types of pronouns. A separate video will come. So before we're done, here's an example. I want you to press pause on your video player. I want you to go through the two paragraphs here. There are 17 subjects. Look for them, underline them, or write them down somewhere. See if you can find all 17 subjects. Press play, and I'll show you the answers, okay? And there they are. It, bats, which, they, this, bats, they. What elocution does is one subject, and then echolocation does is a subject. Echolocation by itself is the subject. You have the noun clause subject, and then you have the subject of the noun clause. This same process, if you just said this, that's fine. If you just said process, that's fine, but it's a whole phrase. The former, the latter, both. Being thus able to navigate in all environments, and being is the head gerund noun. And to have this edge is another subject. 17 subjects. Now, I'm not going to go over each one of these because it basically repeats what we've just spoken about. If you are not sure about why any of these are subjects, please ask below in YouTube, and I'll be happy to explain over there. Okay, so that is all there is. It's very, very important that you're able to recognize subjects. It's very important that when you are writing, you recognize the subjects that you are using. Make sure that you have a subject, first of all. I see many people writing essays, and they have these long, complicated sentences, but the one thing they're missing is the subject. If you don't have a subject, you have a sentence fragment, okay? If you have a sentence fragment, it means you don't have a sentence, and then you're losing points on your grammar section of your scoring. Make sure you have a subject, make sure the verb agrees with this subject. Now, if you have any questions about any of this, please ask me here below in YouTube. I'll be happy to answer these questions for you. And if you like the video, please give me a like and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to come back for more videos about writing, grammar, all kinds of things you need to know to write well and pass your tests. I'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.